I'm sorry. Those are some of the hardest words for us to speak, right? At least to say them in a way that actually means something. Because we've all seen people say that they're sorry, but it doesn't really seem like that they're sorry. You know what I'm talking about? And if you're a parent, this is one of the struggles you have with your kids, right? When you're having them apologize to somebody, when you're having them say they're sorry to somebody, especially if it's their sibling or another kid, they're like, sorry, you're an idiot. You know, like, okay, well, that's not really saying you're sorry. But for example, have you ever watched a celebrity try to apologize, right? It usually goes pretty terrible, right? They're usually reading it, which always feels odd. Like it's hard to get a sense that it's heartfelt when they're reading it. It sounds like it was written by a team of lawyers. It always feels performative and like it's more about damage control and kind of a PR move more than a genuine desire to actually make things right with the person that they wronged. So I don't know if you remember a couple years ago when Will Smith walked on the stage at the Oscars and he slapped Chris Rock. And he said, keep my wife's name out your mouth. Anybody remember that? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Then a couple weeks later, he tried to make an apology, and it was so bad, it just made it worse. Can you imagine like trying one of those celebrity-type apologies, like trying that on the people in your life after you said or did something stupid or hurtful? You'd be like, okay, honey, can you come in the living room for a second? Okay, cool. Thank you for coming. I'd now like to read a prepared statement. I'd officially like to apologize to those who may have been impacted by my alleged actions. I acknowledge that there may be those who were upset or bothered, maybe even potentially hurt by the conduct of which I'm being accused. I'd like to make it clear that I did not intend to hurt or harm any of those individuals, whoever they might be. I take full responsibility for my words and my actions, even though they were clearly taken out of context. I'm actually going to be taking some time away from my day-to-day duties to be alone, just me and the TV, to think about and reflect on what has transpired and my role in it. And as I will be focusing on myself, I want to thank you in advance for respecting my privacy during this difficult time. If you or the children have any questions or additional commentary on this matter, please direct all that communication to my counsel or to your therapist. Thank you. Oh, and please, if you could let me know when the DoorDash guy arrives, that would be fantastic, right? And that's how you end up the victim on a true crime documentary. But our mouths get us into trouble, right? They get us into trouble. Have you ever had that moment when you're talking and you knew that you should stop talking, but you didn't? Like you saw the stop sign coming, but you just decided to blow right through it. You had the right to remain silent, but you didn't have the ability to, and so you just kept talking. So Dr. Caroline Leaf, who's an expert in like brain chemistry and interpersonal communication, she actually talks about how there's 4 questions to ask yourself before you say anything before speaking, especially like in a family setting, and they are fantastic. The first one is, does this need to be said? That's a great question, right? Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me right now? And my personal favorite, will I regret not saying this? Right? Because nobody's ever, like we have way fewer regrets about what we didn't say than the things that we actually did say. Aren't those great questions? Like you should like take a picture of that and send it to somebody who has a hard time not running their mouth. I love how straightforward and blunt the scriptures are sometimes. Like in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19, it says, too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. I like that. In Proverbs 21, 23, it says, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut and you'll stay out of trouble. Like that's just great Great advice. And wouldn't it be great the next time that somebody was just like running their mouth or talking too much or being careless with their words, if you just like shot them a text and you're like, look, the Lord put Proverbs 10:19 on my heart for you with a little praying hands emoji. You don't even tell them what the verse says. Just send them the reference. And they'll be like, oh, that's so kind. And then they're going to look it up, right? So we've been talking all month about the power of our words, about how there's almost a magic to them. In fact, if you're a parent, you've probably used that terminology with your kids, right? When they were little, especially when you're teaching them to be polite. But this series isn't really about us having better manners in our family, although that would be great, right? That's a great start. But it's really about us understanding that our words have the capacity to both create and destroy, to encourage and discourage, to build up and to tear down, to inspire and also to wound. And we've all been on both sides of that equation, right? We've all been on the receiving end and we've all been on the giving end of all of that stuff. This month has really been about the power that we have to build the kind of families and marriages and relationships that we all dream of just simply by shifting the way that we communicate with one another. In fact, when you think about it, when it comes to our words, the closer the relationship, the greater the power that they have, right? The more impact that they have when they're spoken. To the point where even in our closest relationships, even unsaid words can impact the trajectory of our life and certainly our family, right? I mean, nobody has ever pointed out or quoted to me what a neighbor or a coworker never said to them. But I've had all kinds of communication and conversation with people who have talked about the words or the phrases that they never heard their father or their mother say. Words like, I'm sorry, or I love you, or I'm proud of you. My grandpa on my dad's side, he was a World War II veteran, and he was a farmer in Texas, and was like the least emotionally aware person ever. He was just very uncomfortable with affection. He was very uncomfortable with emotion, and it significantly impacted my dad. And I'll never forget, like at the end of his life, my dad just desperately wanting his dad to just say, I love you, and he just couldn't say it. When I was a kid, I remember going to my grandpa's house, and we would go over and hug him and be like, we love you, Grandpa. And he'd be like, all right, be good. And he just like pushes away, you know. The truth is, see, your family has been shaped by the words that that have been spoken to you, about you, at you, and over you. They impact who you see in the mirror when you look in the mirror, right? They impact how we define and look at each other. And so in this series, we've chosen 3 words that we're looking at. And they're words that definitely have power by themselves, but they actually represent something deeper that we've been wanting to cultivate and grow in our relationship. So last week we talked about the word please, and we actually looked at that word, and we looked at what happens in our families when we actually take the posture of humility, when we actually approach one another in a humble way, because that's really at the essence or at the core of humility. Of please, excuse me. If you haven't been around, I do encourage you, man, go back and listen to the podcast and try to catch up. I think it'll really, really help you in your family. So today, I actually want to spend a few minutes talking about the word sorry. So there's this really kind of surprising verse in Romans 12. It's the type of verse that's you're surprised when you read it that it's in the Bible. Because normally God is so definitive, or at least we think of him that way, that everything is black and white, that his instructions and his commands are very clear. Do this and don't do this and be like this and say this and go there. Like that's the way we think of it. But this one is a little bit different. But before we get there, I want to give you a little bit of background in case you're kind of new to all this Bible stuff, in case the church is new to you. And so this guy, Paul, after he encountered Jesus, he spent the rest of his life traveling all over the Mediterranean Rim. He was a Jewish Pharisee, a Jewish religious leader. And then he had an encounter with Jesus that changed everything. And so he spent the rest of his life traveling all over the Mediterranean Rim, telling people about Jesus and starting churches. And then later, he would write letters back to those churches to help them stay on track. And his letters compose about 50% of the New Testament. I saw a meme recently, and it's pretty funny, and it's very accurate, so I thought I'd share it. It's a meme about, this is the kind of memes that pastors look at. Okay, it's a little nerdy. But most of his letters had the same basic structure. It's grace to you. I thank God for you. Hold tight to the gospel. For the love of everything holy, stop being stupid. And oh yeah, Timothy says hi. Like that structure is pretty much every letter that he sends. And the reason I bring it up, the reason why I point that out is because all of his letters, they're deeply theological, but they're also extremely highly relational. And that's actually true in this book Romans, in this letter Romans as well. But Romans is actually a little bit different from his other letters because he's writing it to a church that he didn't start. In fact, when Paul is writing this letter, he'd never even been to this church. And so Romans is basically him going, here's all the things I know that I think you need to know about Jesus and about what it looks like to follow him, about what he did for us. And so the first part of the book is really about the theology of the Christian faith. And then the second part is much more practical. It's about what it looks like to live this stuff out. It's about how to live in relationship and community and connection with one another, because the church as itself, the church as an organization, the church as a movement was brand new. There had never really been anything like it. And so when you get to chapter 12 in Romans, there's a big chunk of it that kind of reads like this sort of quick hit list of a whole bunch of things that he's like, you should do these things and don't do these other things. Anybody got like a house rules kind of sign in their house? One that looks a little bit like this, like it's like, in this house we love each other and we laugh and like wash your dishes and don't be dumb, all those house rules, you know what I'm talking about? So that's the kind of feel that this part of Romans chapter 12 has. And right in the middle of what I'm going to call Paul's house rules, he says this in Romans 12, verse 18. He says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read the if it is possible part, it makes me breathe a little bit easier. I was like, all right, thank God. Because it means that there are situations where living at peace with somebody might not be possible. See, there are some relationships where it might not be possible for you to stay in them and also stay healthy. Because the truth is, sometimes there are people who will cast you as a villain in their story no matter what you do. But the good news is their story doesn't have to be your reality. There will be people who don't want to hear your side of the story because the side of the story that they heard or the side of the story they have, it fits with how they want to feel about you. And so they don't care what you have to say. By the way, living at peace with people, with someone, doesn't mean that you have to stay in a close relationship with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Now, of course, there are situations that you may choose to do that. And certainly when we're talking about family, that might be the place where you choose. Like you have a family member who consistently chooses to misunderstand you, but you're just like, what am I going to do? It's my kid. What am I going to do? It's my dad. What am I going to do? I'm going to stay in this relationship. But it doesn't mean you have to do that. So he says, if it is possible, it's an acknowledgement that relationships are messy and there's always two sides. But then right afterwards, right as we sort of take a deep breath and go, whew, all right, if it's possible, then he slaps us with that as far as it depends on you part. It's almost like he's going, look, I know that there are two sides, and one of them you can't do anything about, but there's a whole lot that you can do about your side. So you got to work as hard as you can, and you got to do everything within your power to live at peace with everyone. And it's going to be harder than you think, and it's going to feel unfair, and it's going to feel one-sided, and there's a chance that they won't respond. Do it anyway. I love that these words were actually written by this guy, Paul, because if you were to go back and you were to read the book of Acts and you were to read a little bit about his life and his journey and his interactions with some of the other church leaders and even reading through some of his letters, like Paul was not somebody who shied away from conflict, like far from it. He was fiery, he was intense, he rubbed people the wrong way, even other church leaders. He didn't handle every situation perfectly, but he was healthy and he was growing and he loved and cared for people deeply, and he did everything within his power to live at peace with them. See, here's something you already know, but I just want to remind you of this morning. Like, we don't actually fall into great relationships, into great families. We foster them. right? They don't just happen. We build them, we grow them, we invest in them. They require us to spend ourselves in the direction of what's good and healthy and loving. Now, I started here because I think that sorry is the first step, or at least one of the first steps in learning to live at peace with everyone, especially with those who are closest to us. But then there's also a problem, right? And the problem is that most of us are just bad at saying sorry. We're just bad at apologies. I have been. I think I've messed up sorry in just about every possible way that you can mess it up. So I wanted to give you a few examples of how not to say that you're sorry from my own life. The first one is sorry if, right? Sorry if I somehow hurt your feelings. I'm sorry if you got offended. I'm sorry if something I said somehow, maybe in some alternate universe where you're super sensitive, sorry if is a conditional apology, right? It's like clearly you're upset. And maybe it's because of what I said or did, or maybe not. Maybe you just took it wrong. So sorry if, terrible way to apologize. Sorry, but. This is probably my favorite go-to way of bad apologies. Right? It's probably the most common. I'm sorry, but. It's an explanation apology. I'm sorry, but, and then I'm about to give you the whole explanation of why I shouldn't even be saying I'm sorry, right? I'm sorry, but I didn't mean it that way. You took it wrong. I'm sorry, but it just didn't come out right. I'm sorry, but I was just joking around. I was trying to be funny. I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to go this way, right? The problem is that when an apology is combined with an explanation, it always sounds like an excuse. Always. In fact, most of the time, explaining sounds and feels like blaming. It's like, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way, but it's sort of your fault. Right? And the blaming thing kind of brings me to the third and final way of how not to apologize, and that's, I'm sorry you, right? Because anything that comes after that is not going to be helpful. This is like the full-on blame-shifting apology. Sorry you misunderstood. Sorry you just don't get my sense of humor. Right? It's like saying, it's really your fault that I said what I said. Not only do these types of apologies not fix or repair anything, they usually make things worse. Because not only did you hurt me, right, but now I know that you care more about your pride or your excuse or your explanation or whatever it is. You care more about that than there being peace between us. And you certainly care more about that, about your pride, than my pain or the pain that it caused me or the way that it affected me. So I wanted to give you the best way to apologize. It's very simple, but it's easier said than done. Ready? Here it is. I'm so sorry. And here's the most important part. There it is. The period. I'm so sorry, period. Just stop talking after that. Because anything you say after that point sounds like an excuse. See, this is where that whole "as far as it depends on you" part comes into play. Because you know who likes apologizing? Nobody. Nobody likes that. I mean, let's be honest. We're all like, you're the only part of your family that's here, right? You're always right. They're the problem, right? Like, we're all always right all the time, especially when compared to those confused, ridiculous people in our families. We have perfectly good reasons why we said the things that we said and did the things that we did. And it's usually because they were being stupid. And this is what makes sorry so transformational in our relationships. Because it actually is about us taking responsibility in the way that our actions and our words affect the people around us, especially the people we love. Because intent, right? Because that's the whole "I'm sorry, but." We start arguing about the intent. That wasn't my intent. Intent doesn't matter when there's somebody that's hurt. See, the essence or the core or the frequency of sorry is accountability. It's about owning your part, and it's really, really hard to do. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Jesus said these words. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." I mean, think about that for just a second. The children of God. God wants his family to be defined by people who are peacemakers. And I think peacemaking begins with sorry. It begins with accountability. It begins with us taking responsibility. Because what we want to do is blame and distract and deflect and explain and excuse. I think one of the sort of worst, best days in a relationship is when you finally realize how much of the chaos in the relationship that you're responsible for, and then you recognize how much power you have to be able to change it. Because then you have to decide, do I actually really want to do that? Even though I have this power, I could make it better, I could apologize, I could take some responsibility, I could choose to be accountable, or I could just be like, I don't really want to do that. It's the worst day in a relationship because, well, giving up our excuses and our tendency to blame other people, well, that's painful. But it's the best day because the only problems that you can fix are the ones that you own. So let me tell you a little bit about what accountability looks like in a relationship. It looks like working to unstrain your relationships as best you can. It looks like building bridges. It looks like trying to heal wounds. It takes the initiative to make things right, even if you weren't completely wrong. And let's face it, you know you were wrong. You were like 16.75% wrong, and they were 83.25. I mean, that 70, whatever the math is. I'm a pastor, you guys. Listen. Peacemaking is about being willing to admit that you're wrong or you don't understand. It refuses to let resentment live in your relationships. It seeks understanding even when it feels misunderstood. It refuses to the pull to villainize people when you're at odds with them. And instead of avoiding people that you're at odds with, it seeks them out to make and to live at peace with them. One of the things that nobody prepares you for when you're like training to be a pastor is just how many people you end up at odds with because they come to church and this is a messy place as we're getting to build relationships with each other and people are learning to follow Jesus. And so we're living together and I'm imperfect. And so I've said things that have come across insensitive to people and people that I'm close to. And there's people that leave your church and they're upset. And every single one of those situations, I have pursued those people and tried to go make it right and try to figure out how do we reconcile, to do everything in my power to live at peace with them. But have you ever been in one of those situations where like something's between you and somebody and then you like run in, like you see them in the grocery store and you're just like, oh shoot, and you try to go down a different aisle? You know what I'm talking about? And then they saw you and you're like, oh gosh. See, peacemaking doesn't do that. See, the bottom line is that sorry is choosing accountability for your wrongs instead of accusing other people of theirs. And of course they have their wrongs. Of course they do. Nobody's perfect. But sorry, it's focusing on your part instead of like fixating on their part. And honestly, there ain't none of that that's easy. All of it's hard. It all takes courage. It all takes vulnerability because it flies in the face of our own like deeply ingrained instinct to prioritize and protect and just sort of excuse and pardon ourselves and let ourselves off the hook. So James, who was the half brother of Jesus, and I bring this up almost every time that we talk about James, like what would you have to do to convince your sibling that you are God, right? But James grew up with Jesus, and it wasn't until Jesus had died and rose from it. He wasn't one of the disciples, but then he saw his brother come back from the dead and he became a leader in the movement of Jesus. So James says something really powerful about what happens when we're willing to do the work of accountability. In James 5:16, he says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. And so there's this simple yet profound truth that confession to God is how we're forgiven. But there's this sense in which confession to each other is actually how we begin to heal. And when it comes to our families and your relationships especially, confession is definitely how those relationships begin to heal. See, we want to be able to go, man, I said that thing and I'm at odds with that person, but I prayed about it and God, forgive me, I'm owning it. Okay. But we haven't had that confession, we haven't had that conversation, we haven't taken accountability in that relationship. And so even though we're forgiven, even though things are good between us and God, there's still all that distortion and noise and tension in our relationship between us and the other person. So one of the most famous stories in the New Testament, especially if you grew up in church, is about a guy named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus was known for two things, being short and collecting taxes. When I was a kid, we sang a song in Sunday school about Zacchaeus. Anybody know that song? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. It's not politically correct, all right? Nor was it very nice, but we don't care, right? But Zacchaeus was the most unpopular guy in his city because he was a traitor to his people. He was a tax collector for the Romans. In short, he was a Jew who was working for the Romans to rip off his own people. And they hated him for it. So in Luke chapter 19, Jesus is going through the city where Zacchaeus lives, and the massive crowds have come out. People are everywhere, and Zacchaeus can't get through or around the crowd, and so he climbs up in this tree so he can see Jesus. And Jesus stops at the tree as he's going by, and he does something, and he says something that shocked the crowd and would have made everybody angry. He says, Zacchaeus, I want you to come down out of the tree. We're going to go to your house and have lunch. And so everybody that's around, they're standing around, they hear Jesus say, and they're all thinking are you kidding me? We got up early, we got up at 6 a.m., I got my kids out of bed, we fed them, we got them dressed, we came all the way down here so that we could see you, so that we could meet you, and you're gonna go home with that guy? You're gonna go to his house? Do you know who he is, Jesus? Do you know what he does? Do you know what he's done to us? Do you have any idea how many sin cooties you're gonna have after you leave his house? Something incredible happens after his encounter with Jesus. When they finish with lunch, Zacchaeus comes outside, and all of the crowds, nobody's left. All the crowds, they're still there because they still want to see Jesus. And so Zacchaeus comes outside, and he makes this declaration to all of the people who are gathered there, all of the people in his community, and he says it so that they can all hear it. It's not just something that he confesses to Jesus, this is my plan, God, and a secret prayer. No, he says it to everybody. To all the people that he had hurt, all the people he'd taken advantage of, all the people that he says now that he's going to make it right. And this is what happens in Luke 19, verse 8. Zacchaeus says, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if, all right, Zacchaeus didn't hear this sermon. You can't use if, Zacchaeus. It wasn't a perfect apology. He says, if I cheated, because as soon as he said if, everybody's like, if. He says, if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. And notice, he doesn't make excuses or justify what he did. He's not like, okay, listen, you guys, look, I know I did some things wrong, right? But you guys don't understand the Romans. You don't know the pressure I'm under collecting these taxes. He doesn't say, yeah, I know I skimmed a little off the top. I may have squeezed you a little bit. But have you guys heard of Herod? Hello, he's the real bad guy. He's the one that's robbing us blind. He's the one that's taking all the money. He's the one. He doesn't do any of that. Instead, he immediately sets about to make it right with the people that he's wronged. Now, what he does when we read it, it's cool and sort of mildly interesting to us, but the significance of it is really lost on us. Because the people who heard Zacchaeus say what he said, they would have been like, wait, what? You're going to do what? You're going to give how much? What did you guys have for lunch again? Because culturally, in this kind of situation, giving away 20% would have been considered incredibly, over the top generous. It would have been proof that he had changed and that he was serious about making it right. It's not just a gesture, oh, that guy's serious. He doesn't stop at 20%. He says, I'm going to give away 50% of everything I have. I mean, think about that. Think about 50% of your entire wealth. 50% of everything you have. You're just going to go, this is what I'm willing to do in order to try to live at peace with you. On top of that, so the Mosaic law that they all lived by, the Jewish law, it was specific about what you had to do if you stole from or cheated somebody. And it said that you had to repay them what you took, so you had to return what you took from them, and then you were supposed to add 1/5 or 20% of the value of that total amount on top of it. And so if I cheated you out of $100, I'd give you your $100 back, plus I'd give you another 20. And so Zacchaeus is going, if I cheated somebody out of $100 though, I'm going to give you $400. This is why they're just like, something happened in that room with Jesus, because nobody does that. And this is what I want you to see, is that accountability is the difference between saying you're sorry and actually showing it. Because what he does, what he says, when he steps into that space and he begins to talk to all the people, he doesn't just say, hey, sorry, you guys. Listen, I'll be fair from this point out. We're good, right? We're all right? No. He's like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to demonstrate that I know, I'm taking ownership. I know what I've done, and I'm going to make it right. It's sincere and specific. It's meaningful, and you can measure it. See, it's not enough just to feel bad. You actually have to work to make it good between you. And look at what Luke tells us. Maybe the most interesting and telling part of the story is the way that Jesus responds to what Zacchaeus says. And I imagine him, he's stepping out there and he's standing next to Zacchaeus and he's got just a big smile on his face. He maybe got a hand on his shoulder as Zacchaeus finishes telling everybody what he's going to do. And it says in Luke 19, verse 9, Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today. Don't rush past that. Salvation has come to this house because he believed something, Jesus, and said a prayer with you in there? No. Because he felt bad and came out and said he was sorry? No. Because he took responsibility. Because what he did to make it right was evidence that his heart had changed. Because for the first time, maybe in his life, he was doing everything in his power to live at peace with everyone, to say sorry, to take accountability for his actions. And the accountability he took, it was costly. The price was high, but it was worth it. And so Jesus says salvation has come to this house today. Wow. Like in our modern understanding of what it actually means for us to experience salvation, that doesn't fit in the box. That's how serious Jesus takes this stuff. So in Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 24, Jesus says something that you may have heard, but I don't think that we take serious enough. He says this. He says, if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple, if you're there worshiping God and you're presenting a sacrifice at the temple, and you remember that someone has something against you, not that you have something against someone else, but you remember somebody has something against you. Darn it, that's the part you can't control, right? He says, leave your sacrifice at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your sacrifice to God. So a number of years ago, when I was in high school, I was traveling with my youth pastor, a friend of mine named Donnie, and we were traveling for him to go speak at another church. It was about 3 or 4 hours away from where we were. And it was just he and I. We got to the service and worship. He was on the stage and he came out to speak. And I noticed when he first started talking, like he kept looking over this way. And finally, just a couple minutes in, he said, hey, John, hey man, I haven't seen you in a long time. And he turned around and he said to the pastor, he said, could the band come back and lead us in a little bit in another song. He's like, because I haven't seen John in a while, and the last time I saw him, things didn't end very well between us, and I need to go make it right with him. And I was sitting in the back over here, and the band came back out, and he walked off the stage, and he walked in. It was a huge room, because he didn't have to do that. It was a big old auditorium full of people. He could have just been like, oh, there's John. I'm not looking that way. I'm going to avoid John. I'm going to go back into the green room afterwards, and I'm going to slip out the side, and we can just hit the road. But he came off the stage, and he went and sat with John, and then they got up, and they went in the lobby, and they got in a huge fist fight. No, I'm just kidding. They didn't do that part. And he made it right. And they came in together, and then he came back on the stage and preached. I'll never, ever, ever forget that, because I thought, that guy actually believes this stuff. And I remember thinking, that's what I want to be. That's how seriously I want to take this. And so Jesus says, if you come and you're ready to make a sacrifice and you're ready to worship, and then you remember and you look across, or you see somebody and that person has a friend, or they remind, and you go, oh my gosh, that's right about that situation. He goes, you should just leave and go make it right. And just on face value, what Jesus said should just blow our minds. But here's what's crazy. Jesus said this during the Sermon on the Mount, which he delivered on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, and the temple was 75 miles away. So it was a 24-hour journey on foot, a minimum of a 2-day journey one way. That's how serious God is about the whole, as much as it depends on you, part of living at peace with everyone. Because there's not anything convenient or easy about sorry, but Jesus says it's always worth it, even if you got to make a 2-day trip all the way there to take care of it and to make it right, and then travel 2 more days back in order to make it happen. According to Jesus, one of the most important parts of worshiping God is us working to make things right with other people. In fact, he says that takes precedence over what's going on between you and me. Because it's going to be very difficult for things to be right between you and me if things are wrong between you and somebody else. And notice the timing of what Jesus said. He's like, go as soon as you know. Man, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. But think about it. I mean, just imagine. Think about your family. Like, what if we started just with our family, just with our closest relationships? Forget your coworkers, forget your neighbors, forget all that. Just with the people that you're closest to. Like, can you imagine? Imagine what could change in your family. Imagine what could change in my family if we chose to approach those relationships with humility, like we talked about last week, and with accountability, like we're talking about today. We imagine what would happen if we led with please, if we led with sorry. Imagine the power you have to shape your family in the direction that you want it to go. So here's my questions for you. Where do you need, in your family, in your relationships, where do you need to take accountability? What have you just been making excuses about? What have you just been saying, sorry if, sorry but, sorry you? Where have you been deflecting, kind of focusing on what, yeah, but you did that, and it's tit for tat, and where do you need to just stop all of that and just take some responsibility and choose accountability? What relationship in your life needs a dose of sorry from you today? Not tomorrow, because if it needs it today, right? Not next week, not I need to go think about it, not I need to pray about it, not I don't know what to say, I need to No, what relationship needs a dose of sorry from you today? Who is it that you might owe an apology to? If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. In the verse we read, Jesus says to leave your sacrifice and go and be reconciled with that person. And the word that he uses that gets translated into English as reconciled, because we get hung up on that, right? Because we just think, well, everything goes back to normal. And we go, well, there's some relationships that can't go back to normal because of all that's happened. But the word that Jesus uses, the concept that he's talking about is to end, means to end a conflict In other words, to make peace. Yeah, but what about, and I don't know. He's like, you need to go end the conflict. Yeah, but you don't understand. End the conflict. I would love to be able to tell you that every one of those situations that I described, that when I tried to go make it right with those folks, that everything was fixed. But it's not. But what I can tell you is the conflict itself is ended. The relationship might not ever be the same, but now they're not ducking to avoid, and the conflict is ended. And it was hard because I wanted to explain. No explanation needed. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, with the people you love, live at peace with them. Let's pray together.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.